it would be easier just to switch the tab on your computer.
Yeah. No, like, you know how like there's slide 6 where it's like we want to put the actual average scores, like we should just do that together. Does that make sense?
Oh, wait, I'm now confused.
Will you look at slide 6? Will you not?
Yes.
Do you see how it's like blank so far? Like it doesn't have the average scores. Like we're going to do that in live time.
Oh, do you want me to type them in while you're
Yeah, like we'll do it together basically. Like you and I will hang out in the main room as results come in. Does that make sense?
Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm gonna let everyone in now.
Okay.
Okay. Will you press present?
And then I also need to do one more thing when we start, which is record.
Oh, I forgot to include the slide. We're good.
Okay.
You feeling okay?
Yep.
Okay, you look so tall.
I look tall.
Just because like my seat's higher than yours usually. Your low is weird. Hi guys. How are you all?
Great. How are you?
Good. It's our last Zoom session. I'm so excited. We'll be in person next week. I think that will change everything, hopefully.
Oh, it's logging in on what time?
Hmm?
What time is this logging in?
6:20. Cool. Sponge cool. 6:40 for Massive, but she's coming at 6:15.
Let's get started.
Okay.
Like 2 minutes now.
All right. Hi, Hi, everyone. We're going to get started. Thank you so much for showing up on time. I'm super excited to see your faces. And this is going to be our last Zoom session. So I'm super excited to see everyone next week in person for the rest of the quarter. So we're going to dive into that. But today I'm super excited that we're going to lead our first deep dive session. So deep dives are really an opportunity for you to get to know a specific industry or a specific topic in VC. And this week, we're going to really touch upon the really important topic of diversity in venture capital and startups. And today you'll be hearing from me. You've been hearing from me a lot, as well as Ava, who is a part of the Breakthrough organizing team and has done a wonderful job supporting the research and making today's session possible. Okay. So the agenda for today. So we're going to do an icebreaker. Then we're going to talk about what does diversity look like today in VC. And then at 6:20, we're going to transition to Maria from Unshackled Ventures, who is coming to kind of speak about her work supporting immigrant founders. And then at 6:40, we're going to hear from Elizabeth Yin, who is a general partner and co-founder of the Hustle Fund, which focuses on democratizing wealth through entrepreneurship. All right, Ava, if you want to hop in now and kind of describe the icebreaker today.
Okay, so for the icebreaker today, you are going to act as a firm or investor that is evaluating 3 hypothetical startups in a breakout room. And in a moment, we'll show you the rubric for the different criteria that you'll be evaluating these startups with. But each category you will give like the startup a different ranking from 1 to 4, and then you'll take the average of those numbers and then round to the nearest whole number and then submit that for each startup in the Google form. And then all of this information, like the descriptions of startups, like the rubric, that's all in the Google form as well.
Awesome. So as Ava had mentioned, we basically sourced investment criteria that a lot of top firms, as well as firms associated with Silicon Valley and Stanford, use to assess startups. And we want you to pretend that you are an investor or a GP at this specific firm, and you're basically ranking these startups based on the guiding questions and investment criteria you have at this firm. So all the instructions are in the Google form, and I'm just going to assign you guys into breakout rooms. All right. And we're going to spend about 5 minutes in breakout rooms, and make sure to submit the form when you guys are ready.
Wait, you assigned me to a breakout room. Did you want me to join it?
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
All good. Okay.
Okay.
Yes. Should I reassign?
Okay, this is still being live streamed and recorded. It'll be really annoying to stop both. So
Sure. That works.
just so you guys know.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to minimize that.
Are you going to need the results to be displayed on my computer too? Probably, right?
I
Shared
have it like as a slide that I'm going to update right now, actually. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good idea.
Thank you.
How are you, Ava? Oh, Brandon.
Hey, Brandon, we're currently doing a breakout room activity, so I'm just going to assign you to a room, and they'll catch you up in the room if that works.
Oh, did you put him in a room with 5?
With 3.
Oh.
Yeah, there are 3. Oh, I should have put them at the end. Oh, well. Should I move it? It's too
No,
late.
no. Okay.
It's all good. La, 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 la. Responses. Give me responses.
No. Spreadsheet. No spreadsheet. That'll be so annoying to look at, right?
Oh, well, I have to average them, so I want to do it quickly, right?
Oh. Excel queen.
Thanks, babe. Appreciate you. Okay, cool. How many are we at?
4, 8.
Oh, wait, actually, I could probably see on my end.
Wait, are we doing it? Oh yeah, the average score.
Yes.
Okay. If you open it in a spreadsheet, you probably can just average it there.
Yeah, that's what I was
23.
planning on doing too. If you want to do that with me, Ava, too, so then we can like check each other.
Yes.
Okay, cool. What time is it? Oh, it's 6:07. Okay, literally like we can only probably give them like 2 more minutes.
Yeah.
Hi. I'm gonna assign you to a breakout room. We're currently doing an activity. And then yeah. Let's see.
Oh.
What's up?
The results are.
So far, 3 groups. Okay. Where do I manage breakout rooms again? Where are they at?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Assign to room 7. Assign to-
Thank you.
Of course.
Wait, this is so interesting. They're ranking it a little differently than we thought.
It's 1 response so far, right?
Mhm.
So they're doing 1. It's fair. 3. Interesting. 2.
Ooh.
I think it's because I put like they don't have a product yet. Does that make sense?
Mm.
Which is true.
I
based
mean,
on-
yeah.
That's like, yeah.
How many breakout rooms did we have?
We had 7.
Okay.
Okay, let me broadcast that. They have 2 minutes left. 1 minute to get your results. Actually, 2 minutes, right?
I
would
don't think
do-
anyone has it in yet.
Okay, 2 minutes to get your results in. All right, Ava, we're gonna have to rush through the rest of them.
I cut some stuff out of my presentation and because it's a little redundant, so
Totally fair.
I
Okay,
can talk fast if I need to.
awesome. Me as well. Hopefully, like it's an overview, and then depending, so Maria should come on at 6:15. So at that point, we can like figure out whether or not like what the pacing looks like.
Okay. Because she starts speaking around 6:20, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Are people? I'm gonna close. Oh, okay. All right.
We're just gonna join a breakout room to help. We'll be back.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm close it now. Okay, we're gonna close. That gives them 60 seconds.
Mhm.
Ooh, okay. Close
We have 4 responses.
love. Okay, let me get back on here.
So the average of the first one is like one.
Ava, you can see like the screen and everything.
I'm just talking.
Yes, I can.
Oh no, they're coming back. Oh, perfect. Oh, JK. Oh gosh.
What's up? Are you good?
No, yeah, I'm good. It's just
Okay, welcome back, guys. Thank you so much for participating in that activity. We're gonna reveal the results of how everyone ranked everything. Okay. Ava, if you wanna take it over from here.
Okay, so the average scores for what you all ranked, the startups was for startup 1, 1.5, startup 2, score of 3, and startup 3, a score of 2.7.
And for startup 3, we just had some final responses come in. So Arshia can update us with that number.
yeah, so it looks like the startup 2 average score has gone down to somewhere around like 2.6, and the startup 3 average score has gone up to somewhere around 3.2.
Okay, awesome. So thank you guys so much for participating in that activity. We're now going to do a startup reveal. So these are actually real startups that exist in the world. So what are they?
So the startups that we use in these hypothetical startups, they were actually real startups. Diva Cup was startup one, Calendly was startup two, and Theranos was startup three. Diva Cup and Calendly are both very successful with valuations of 632 million and $3 billion respectively. While, as many of you know, Theranos is currently being sued.
Yeah, so basically what we wanted to show from this exercise is how sometimes investment criteria that is really used in a lot of VC firms, like this is the standard that we've actually synthesized from a ton of really big VC firms in the Valley and associated with Stanford, can often rely on things such as access to resources, background, education that may not be equitable for all people. And that idea of fit, for example, can often be really problematic because we often allow VCs to rely on qualities about a founder's potential that may be based on implicit bias and kind of supporting institutional like ways to kind of keep diverse founders and venture capitalists outside of breaking into this industry. And you guys can actually Google these questions and these criteria to find out which VC firms actually use these. I think it'll be interesting to see like how prevalent these really are. But that kind of leads me to kind of discuss like venture capital as something that really needs to diversify today, and how one problem that we're really seeing is that this rigid definition of fit often interferes with a venture capitalist's ability to realize market opportunity. And these are a lot of challenges that entrepreneurs cite for not receiving funding. And oftentimes when a VC firm kind of evaluates a founder or a startup, they're not really saying kind of these like implicit biases out front. Really, they're kind of putting it down to fit as well as market opportunity. So this is from a Morgan Stanley study that was conducted in 2019. And 57% of founders who heard no said investors do not think my company aligned with their investment strategy. 53% said investors don't understand the market opportunity. And 51% reported that investors were not interested or excited by the market for my company. So essentially the idea of market and investment strategy, which actually goes back to like a firm's thesis, can often be founded on things that may be inequitable or rely on access to opportunity and resources that may not have been traditionally available to all types of people, and allow VCs to miss out on really great opportunities. If I had the opportunity to invest in Calendly, I would use that, like jump in day one. But the founder actually kind of heard no from all of the big VC firms and essentially had to kind of go through and bootstrap his entire company by himself until he raised his Series B. So this is kind of a general overview of racial and ethnic diversity in VC today. It's kind of astounding. So essentially, if we're looking at those who have reached investment partners, this is a study conducted by Deloitte in a sample size of around 400 people. Overwhelming majority is people who have like a white background. And we see a lot of underrepresentation in Black and African Americans, as well as those who are reported Hispanic and Latino and Latinx. Gender diversity is also very concerning. We see that in the overall workforce, we kind of have a 45%, 55% divide, but if we kind of segment into investment partners, we have only 14% of women who are represented as investment partners in VC today. And you may also be wondering about what that looks like for startup founders as well. So the Kauffman Fellowship is actually an institution based in Palo Alto. Their headquarters are actually in Town and Country, if you guys have ever seen them there. But essentially every year they are a VC, they kind of keep VCs accountable by releasing stats on diversity for the types of investments as well as startups that over 200,000 VCs have invested in, and kind of track basically diversity statistics on seeing who's being represented and overrepresented. So we have kind of an overrepresentation of people who come from white and Asian backgrounds, and a huge underrepresentation of people who come from Latinx and Black backgrounds. So we also see this issue that ethnically diverse startups have higher returns, but still struggle with access to capital. And that was something that we were able to see when we pretended to be VCs, doing the investment criteria, operating on our firm's thesis, and not being able to give that initial check to a lot of companies had huge growth potentials, but were unable to fit into what we had decided as fit market and product market fit as well. And something that's really interesting that the Kauffman Fellowship also pointed out was essentially it's really hard for ethnically diverse founders to access capital. As we can see here, only 22.6% of ethnically diverse founders were able to access Series A and B seed funding. But when they do, they actually outperform those founding teams outperform all white founders by a margin of 30%. Essentially, this statistic is basically saying if you're an ethnically diverse founding team, you are more likely to have reached kind of an exit or an acquisition that makes 30% more capital than your white peers who are all white founders. So then we kind of have this ongoing question, like what's leading to lack of diversity in these spaces. And it really goes down to these issues of like pattern matching, wealth disparities, and barriers to entry. So I'm going to kind of pass this on to Ava for the sake of time to kind of discuss some of the barriers of entry that we've kind of been pointing out throughout the session.
So when it comes to venture capital, there are a number of barriers to entry, not just on like the firm and investor side, but also on the side of founders as well. So one of these barriers is trust, and there are a number of historical situations of discrimination that have led underrepresented minorities to distrust predominantly white and wealthy institutions, organizations, government, firms, etc. And so another barrier of entry is education, because the amount of education that one may have can affect how well they can understand the logistics behind working with the VC, such as things of like finances, legalities, jargon like used in conversation, and a lot of that can determine like that creates a barrier. Another barrier is connections, and venture capital is really hard to break into without having a network in the space. And here at Stanford, we are very lucky to have accessibility to these networks through programs such as Breakthrough that can aid in the networking process. But people from underrepresented minorities may not be able to like live in an area where there's a strong presence of venture capital, which makes it really challenging to develop their networks since like there's not many people around them in venture capital. And as we'll see in like in a bit, that there is a really big concentration of venture capital in certain areas and a very low concentration in other areas. And so the next barrier of entry is geographical location. And venture capital firms are, like I said, are more densely populated in certain areas of the country, like here, such as the Bay Area. And for those that do not live in these areas and want to break into VC, like they would typically have to move to an area where there is more venture capital. And this leads a lot of people to having to make the decision of, do you like leave your family? Do you leave your homelands, or to like pursue like financial stability? Or do you stay there and stay connected to your lands? And this is really prominent in more of like rural areas, like indigenous reservations and like islands such as Hawaii as well. So on the next slide, there's a chart, and this shows the concentration of venture capital firms around the United States. And the larger populated areas such as the Bay Area, New York, Boston, Chicago, etc., have much higher concentrations of venture capital firms. And as we can see, like there's almost just as many venture capital firms in the Bay Area as the rest of the United States as a whole. And so this kind of makes it so that you have to move to these areas to break into venture capital, or like live around there to break into it. And so this is like one of the biggest barriers, is just geographical location.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ava. So I see that Maria has joined us, and we kind of just wanted to provide you guys some context on the state of venture capital and what it means to be a diverse founder in this space. And I think the best way is to hear from someone who is actually working in this space and kind of working to support founders who come from different backgrounds. So Maria, if you are here, I'm just going to give the floor to you.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm right here.
Okay.
So kick it off with a quick intro. Is that the best way to go about it?
Yes, that sounds amazing.
Awesome. So great to meet everyone. My name's Maria. I am immigrant myself. So I was actually born in Colombia and came to the US when I was fairly young. I was 7 years old. My family immigrated to Orlando, Florida, which is where I kind of did my, I think, first grade through 12th grade. And headed off west for college for the first time. Really, I'm a bear, unfortunately. I feel like I'm talking to the opposite school, but it's okay. My best friend Jamara went to Stanford, and I was there all the time. So, and it was actually shortly after graduating that I met the founders of the fund, and they were just getting started. So I was the first hire, helped build the fund since then. So I've been with the fund now 7 years, which is kind of an unheard of in like early career stuff to stay in one place for that long. But really loved everything that came with like building a fund. I felt like the same as being entrepreneurial and building a company, but also getting to invest. So I got like the best of both worlds, being a VC as well as building a company. So the fund itself on Chaco Ventures focuses on immigrant entrepreneurs. So the entire thesis was, we know that immigrant entrepreneurs end up being about 40% of unicorn companies, 40 to 50% of Fortune 500 CEOs and founders. So fairly high percentage. And we also know that immigrants are definitely now 40 to 50% of the population. So it's a population that heavily over indexes in entrepreneurship. And we thought that this was a great place to be investing in very successful founders. Obviously, one of the biggest barriers a lot of immigrants have is on immigration. So our fund has an entire immigration team staffed and prepped to help immigrants basically be able to build companies. So in the case of international students, not have to go to the usual companies for their H-1Bs, but be able to start their own ideas. So yeah, that's a little bit about that. The fund was started in 2014. Been around now. We are in Fund 3. We have made about 67 investments since then. I think majority of the team, so at least from the 2 founding partners, which are Ron and Nitin, 2 Indian guys. The rest of the team is female. So got 2 Latinas, myself, Ali, our analyst is from Mexico. We got Sarah, who is actually from the Midwest, and we got Imani, who is the 3rd generation Black female from San Francisco. So fairly diverse team, fairly young, and fairly female. We're super excited about the team we've built. And I think as a result of having a fairly diverse team, our founders are as well. So I think about 40% of our founders are female founders. And within the BIPOC percentage, I think we're close to like 80 something. Obviously, it does include Indian and Asian, so it's a large population. But we're super excited. I think we're doing pretty good compared to most funds that tend to be fairly low on female investors and folks of color as well. So I'll take a pause there, and then you kind of tell me where to go.
Yeah, thank you so much for that intro, Maria. We're going to open it up to questions that you guys have prepared for Maria. Just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I have a question. First of all, thanks for being here and speaking to us. So as an immigrant founder-focused fund, what steps have you taken to grow your presence in international regions, and how do you effectively compete with funds in the founders locale?
Yeah, I mean, the main thing is a lot of the funds who invest internationally are investing in markets there, right? So they're funding companies that are like the Uber of LATAM, the Uber Eats of India. We are not doing that. Like, we mean like it's folks that have immigrated to the United States and want to build companies here for the US market. And so in terms of like immigrant founders, we don't really compete with any other funds. Like, that's pretty much us. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for presenting today and being here. I thought it was very cool and inspiring to see kind of like your values-based approach to the firm. And as someone with immigrant parents and who grew up in the countryside, like in small town Texas, I was wondering if y'all had any like locations that y'all targeted specifically, and if you had any considerations, for example, like immigrants living in rural areas.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have to kind of prioritize certain areas. Our team is based, 2 of the partners are in San Francisco, 1, I'm in Miami, Florida. There's a couple folks that are in New York. But like we have a university fellowship program. It's the way that we kind of structure is, yeah, we are at the usual universities, but our target universities actually tend to be universities that have a higher percentage population of international students, or universities whose campuses are in like cities with a high percentage of like international students or immigrant entrepreneurs. And so you'll kind of like see like Urbana, like Champaign is one of those. There's I'm trying to think of like the really ASU tends to be one of those, University of Miami, UCF, like a lot of like the Florida, Texas schools end up being part of that, and some of the Chicago that wouldn't technically usually be targeted by most of the venture university programs. So that's a little bit of that. I think we have a decent amount of relationships as well with like the Midwest. So like we just came back from a retreat in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A couple of our investors in our fund are from Midwest, or I guess that's South Mid, whatever. I don't know where that stands, but yeah. I think we're very conscious that the immigrant population is concentrated in different parts, and generally we don't spend too much time actually doing outreach in San Francisco or the Bay Area, because we feel fairly confident that we're going to see those founders no matter what.
Thank you so much. If no one has any follow-ups to that, so I'm not sure if you had any background in like another traditional VC firm, but if you do, like, how did that differ from can you all hear me?
It's a little loud, but I think I can hear you. You want to type it out?
Okay.
Definitely. You're good.
Yeah, Tracy, if you just want to send that into the chat, that would be awesome. But yeah, does anyone else have any other questions? I see so many awesome ones on the Notion that I think definitely should be asked.
Hi, first of all, I want to thank you so much for joining here today to talk with us. The work you're doing is amazing. I just wonder, because I know that there are a lot of legal obstacles, like a lot of legal stuff that you have to take care of when you're an international student, etc. I want to ask you, what are some of the biggest obstacles, legally or otherwise, that you face when working with immigrant or international entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, legally, the obviously one of the biggest obstacles is that the government doesn't consider a company viable enough to sponsor a visa until they've met certain requirements, right? And that's for like good reasons, right? Like if anyone in this call could all of a sudden sponsor their own visas because they started their own company, then like you can imagine it opens the floodgates for a lot of fraud. But the main thing is the government has some thresholds on how much revenue you should have or how many employees you should have before you can be eligible to sponsor a visa. You have to basically show what viability looks like. And as you know, maybe from folks that you know yourself or other peers, starting a company isn't usually like, you don't start with money, and you don't start with like 10 employees, you don't start with like, revenue. And so it's like a little bit of the policy component is not very targeted towards startups, definitely not tech startups. And so that part is really hard, right? So that's kind of, if you go to your international office and you're like, I want to start a company in a visa, most of them are like, it's pretty difficult. But it has been solved for, right? Like when you think about people doing PhDs or your TAs, many of them are international students. And the reason so is because universities have what we consider an R&D lab type of structure that allows them to sponsor visas. And nothing stops a VC firm to do that, right? So we technically as a VC fund also have what is the equivalent of an R&D lab that allows us to sponsor the visas of our founders. So yeah, that's kind of the difficult part. Obviously, like everything else is just, you're working with the government, you gotta wait for them to come back, and like that just takes a really long time. But that I wouldn't say that's unique to immigrants. That's probably across anything else.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, Tracy, got your question. So, I mean, I think there's not a lot of difference in terms of what we do of like the day-to-day job. I think the biggest difference is in how we think about sourcing. So finding companies. So we obviously target different regions, we target different companies, different founder profiles. So sourcing is a little bit different than traditional funds, which traditional funds are usually just sourcing from like the top 10 high growth startups. So think Stripe, Slack, Ramp. They're just looking to see where their talent goes and what they build. So sourcing is a little bit different. Investing itself is basically the same. Nothing really changes from the point of conversation starting to the end. And then a little bit of change and support in the post-investment work. And so every fund, not every fund, but a good number of really good funds have a lot of community building, right? So how do you get your founders to learn from each other? How do you get your founders to mentor back and pay it forward? And how do you support them with like their unique challenges of company building? We still do that, but in addition to that, I think we have a lot of support meant for immigrants, right? Like answering a lot of those questions that immigrants have, which is like, how do I build my credit? How do I buy my first house? How do I rent my first car? Like all those things are kind of fairly unique to the immigrant experience. And so a lot of our support and programming also can be a little bit unique to that. But aside from that, it's still fairly similar to like traditional venture.
I have a quick question. Thanks for being here with us. I'm curious, I think it's incredible you have this kind of focus on immigrant like legal work, especially in the beginning and incorporation stage, because there's like extra, paperwork and all kind of barriers that I personally have gone through. I'm curious like how competitive edge maintains in the later stage for portfolio support as a company try to scale up, and how do you see your firm differentiate yourself from other VCs?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard, right? Like I think no VC firm is truly differentiated, right? Like we're all selling money and convincing founders to take it. Like there's the only differentiation a VC firm can have is in how you support your founders. Some VC funds have like the platform support, right? Andreessen, Sequoia is first round capitals of the world. Some VCs just have the partners do a little bit of absolutely everything, which is more the boutique model, which is like a benchmark type of approach. So there's that, right? Like how you structure your fund, how much support you provide. There's some VC funds that are true believers that the best founders will hire the best talent and they don't need someone like hiring for them, versus, those Andreessens of the world will have an entire talent team helping you hire. And so like there's not a lot of differentiation there per se. And most VC funds, right, you make an investment, on the average time for you to see a return or like some results is 7 to 10 years, right? Like that's the range before you actually know if you're doing any good. And when you see a portfolio of 40, 50 companies, the thing is, we call that the J curve, which is most companies that are going to die earlier on. So when you look at fund performance, the first like 5 to 7 years look terrible because obviously all the bad companies that were going to die, they're going to die. And so you just see loss. And then you see the ultimate winners take forever to actually return the fund. And so like late stage differentiation really just comes from like true just returns of capital. And so what you end up kind of having to think about is who's most likely to return capital. We like immigrants because we think they're incredibly scrappy and capital efficient. And when it's actually a really tough economic position, they tend to actually do fairly well. It could be just, how they think about money. It could be how they think about hiring, how they think about company building, but they tend to do fairly well when it comes to building companies in tough times. And so, time will tell because we haven't actually had a big economic dip in 20 years, but we should be seeing that to be, versus there's a lot of funds who invest in pretty traditional founders who come from very traditional type of backgrounds of high growth startups who are very good at spending money at very high rates. I don't know if you guys saw what happened with the Fast startup. I mean, they were making $600K a year, but they were burning like $100 million a year. So like, it's really easy to work for a company that burns a lot of money, but actually making money is quite the mystery for most of startups.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
I had a slightly tangential question, which I don't know if you'd be able to answer, but I was just wondering, what are some unique challenges that you think female founders face in the industry, particularly as they move like higher up? What are some like hidden ones that maybe we might not be aware of getting into entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think the biggest barrier for female founders definitely comes after Series B, probably. And that ends up being that there's not a lot of female investors after Series B. Majority of female investors, when you think of like who are the big female investors, Kristen Green or Forerunner, Aileen Lee at Cowboy, basically any of the all-raise women, they all tend to be pretty seed Series A, maybe a little bit of Series B. And it just entrepreneurs solve problems that they know and are familiar with. So women over-index in solving problems that are very woman-specific many times, not always, but many times. And so they need investors that understand that problem. And usually once you get past Series B, you're talking to a bunch of growth investors, a little bit of bankers, and that tends to be overwhelmingly white and male. And they just like to invest in like, SaaS enterprise stuff. And like, that's just because what they know, what they like, what they think is exciting, where the multiples are fairly predictable and like its financial model is pretty straightforward. When you're talking about like female hormonal health, when you're talking about like family wellness, when you're talking about mental health, like all of that is a little bit too nuanced sometimes to be captured by a financial model. And I think that's where it gets a little bit complicated. Some founders have done it, right? Like the founders of Modern Health, there's 2 female founders. They're fairly late stage. They've been able to communicate it very well. So I think it takes a tough founder. The founder of Glossier did a fantastic job of being a good storyteller, building a company, building an audience. Trying to think of like what's a really good other founder, Glossier, Guild Education, for anyone that likes ed tech or future work. Guild Education, her name is Rachel. Incredible company. They're probably pre-IPO right now and will do very well, but there's few in between and you could definitely count them. But I think it'll get better as we get more investors late stage.
Just to follow up on that, sorry, are we out of time?
We are. I want to be respectful of Maria's time. So Isha, Maria, is it okay if we have?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, we can have another question. Don't worry. I can have another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah,
go for it.
Sorry.
No, all good. Here, why don't you send us the question, because I think I received a ton more in the chat too. And Maria, is it okay if we just send them to you through email right after this session and then we can relay the answers?
Yeah.
Awesome. Great. I think a lot of students have some questions, so that would be awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Maria. Is there anything you'd like to say as we kind of, as you leave us today?
No, this was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed it. Also, if anyone wants to shoot me any questions, I can't promise to get on a call, but I am happy to send an email back and be as thoughtful as I can be.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, Maria.
Great meeting you all.
Great meeting you. Bye. Okay, thank you guys so much for engaging with Maria. Right now, we have Elizabeth Yin, who's also in our call. So she is the GP and co-founder at Hustle Fund. So I'm just going to let her give an intro about herself and kind of start doing our Q&A with her. So Elizabeth.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay, great. So just quick background on myself. Thanks for having me. I graduated from Stanford in 2004, so ancient years now. I studied electrical engineering. And after graduation, I went to work in a variety of big tech companies. Along the way, I also did an MBA at MIT. And in late 2008, I was thinking, gosh, these big companies, they're really not for me. And so I decided to leave my cushy job at Google, where I was at the time, to start my own startup. And some of you may have heard that was a very bad time. That was like a terrible recession, and we were just entering it when I made this decision. I might not be the best decision maker, but I decided to leave and I had no idea what I was doing. But over the course of the next 2 years, kind of figured out how to build out a startup and eventually built out essentially an ad network for email, if you will, over the course of the next 6 to 7 years. That company was acquired in late 2014. And then that's actually how I got into investing. I have done a lot of angel investing. I have previously, I ran the 500 Startups Accelerator program for almost 3 years, where I was a partner there. and then started Hustle Fund with two Stanford friends of mine about 4 going on 5 years ago, called Hustle Fund. And so that's a bit about me. Started out as an entrepreneur and then ended up making my way to the dark side of the force. In terms of Hustle Fund, we are a pre-seed fund, meaning we invest super early, like we don't care about revenue. Actually, most VCs at that time cared about, do you have traction? You have all this stuff built out, but the problem is most founders don't. So we decided to start a pre-seed shop where we would write quick checks, make a decision in 2 days on 25K, and then work with the founders. And then where we saw, more conviction in working with the founders through progress, then we would write a much bigger check, like $500,000. So that's our model for Hustle Fund. We write a lot of small checks, but we work with the founders, and where we're bullish based on the working period, then we just invest really heavily. We think that actually making investment decisions largely based on working with people is a better way to invest than hearing them talk. So that's our thesis at Hustle Fund. But with that, you may have some burning questions. I'm happy to go right into Q&A if you want.
Great. Yeah, let's have some questions. I see some wonderful ones on the Notion, so feel free to hop in, anyone.
All right. If no one else does, I have. I'll go off with the first question. First off, thank you, Elizabeth, for being here. It's been great to hear about you. So, I at one point I worked during another ACES program. I got the very fun opportunity to chat a bit with your colleague Eric Vaughn, and he told me about Hustle Funds. That its premise is that a great investment can come from anywhere, and that you look at a huge variety of founders when you're considering investments. What do you do specifically and tangibly to put Hustle Fund's value that great investments can come from anywhere into action during your investments?
Yeah, great question. And so I think, because we write a lot of first checks, that gives us a lot of leeway actually to write checks into, frankly speaking, all kinds of people who are working on all kinds of ideas. And then we just kind of see what bubbles up. So that's the general strategy. But then where do all these people come from? And so I think the way we think about Hustle Fund is, like any other business, your number one problem for most businesses is in customer acquisition. And so for us, we think very deeply about how do we do customer acquisition for a VC fund, which may be a weird concept to many people. I think many VCs don't even think that they need to do customer acquisition, but we very much treat this like a professional marketer would, which is like you do, some content marketing and some tweeting or whatever, and you do lead gen, and then people fill out your application form, and then eventually, maybe some small percentage of people convert. In this case, a conversion is us writing a check, but that's the general idea. And so we get applications from literally all over the world. 15% of our portfolio comes completely cold, like meaning they had no touch points to us. There's no person we know in common or anything. And we look at the applications. But I think even if you were like my best friend from Stanford, I would still ask you to fill out the application, because one of the things we noticed from our data, and this is going to sound terrible, but we noticed that actually investing in our friends is not a good way to invest. They actually have not performed well. And it is much harder to actually say no to your friends. So, where you might have said no if you didn't know the person, you end up saying yes for terrible reasons, the relationship reason, and that's not a good way to invest. So we treat everyone the same way by doing this application process. We ask for the same information, upload your DAC, talk about this, talk about that, a little bit actually akin to like how YC does their applications, very standardized.
Thank you so much.
I have a question about, I saw that on the website, one of Hustle Fund's requirements for the founders was that they were working full time. But since you're like investing in pre-seed rounds, I feel like maybe many startups aren't like entirely sure if it's going to be very successful. I guess my question is, do you find that the risk for the founder to like drop out of school or like quit their full-time job usually pays off in the end if you're like requiring them to work full-time?
Great question. And this is actually a very contentious question on our application form. A lot of people have said, if you want to be truly inclusive, there are a lot of people who can't afford to, just quit their jobs. Like they don't have enough money to start their company. And I think that is absolutely true. I think to a good extent, like the applications we get are people who are willing to take that risk and have some level of means to be able to do so, whether it's they come from some level of wealth with their family and they have a safety net, or they have saved up from their job, or whatever it is. So I do take that point. I think the flip side is that unfortunately, we have found that people are much more pot committed if they are doing it full time, because if it's like, oh, this is my side hobby, you can always kind of drag it out. And that is not good from an investment perspective. So I think that's something that we do wrestle with, honestly. And I think to answer your question more concisely about, are people successful when they stop out? No, like a lot of startups do fail. So that is a big risk that entrepreneurs are taking. I think, you know, my business partner, Eric, he bootstrapped his company the whole way, and he ran it part-time for 4 or 5 years before he went full-time on it, like as a side thing, because he could not afford to leave his job, but also VCs would not fund him unless he did, which didn't happen. So it is a problem, but I think there are ways if you really want to do this.
Oh, thank you so much.
Elizabeth, I'm going to hop in with the question. So I know a lot of the work that you do is getting more women to be investors. So I'm just wondering what you think are like the certain barriers that they face, or why we don't see a lot of women becoming investment partners or investors in general, and like how we can make that more of an inclusive space.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to build off a little bit on what I heard of Maria's answer, which is, you know, I think that you are starting to see more women at the earlier stages of investing. And well, how do you land these jobs in the first place? You either start your own fund, in which case, kind of like us, where you're doing the fundraising yourself. I think many people don't think about starting a VC firm as a startup, but really it is the same mechanics. You have to raise money. Actually, even more so, you can't really bootstrap a VC fund, or at least most people cannot. And you also have to do your own marketing, so that way people know about you. As a new fund, nobody has ever heard of you, right? So most of the, actually a lot of female VCs you see are people who started their own funds because they did not get tapped to work anywhere else. But that is a grueling path, because and to be able to fundraise a lot of money is hard. So if you can't raise a big fund, then you are investing early stage, right? Because like, who's going to take your smaller check? Like nobody at Series D is going to take your $500,000. So that's one thing that we do see, like getting more women to start their own funds. That's one path. But I actually think that the path that's quicker, because fundraising for your own fund takes a long time. Like, you know, our fund one was $11.5 million, which may sound like a lot to you, but in the grand scheme of funds, it's small, and that was a 3-year process, basically, like the raising and the deploying. So I think that the faster way is actually through angel investing, getting more women exposed earlier, even in their 20s, to start writing like $1,000 checks. And I know that sounds silly, as like, who's going to take $1,000 check? But like, if you cobble together a handful of people to write $1,000 checks, that's actually pretty meaningful to somebody who's just starting their business, right? You can think of like a number of concrete things to do with, let's say $5,000, even like buy a new computer and this equipment and whatever. So I think that's actually the path, because it is a lot more accessible than for professional women to say, okay, I'm going to angel invest in 5 companies this year for $1,000 each. Like you work at your Google job straight out of college, and I don't know how much those people make anymore, but anywhere between, call it 70K and upwards from there, who knows, if you're a kick-ass CS major, right? So you can afford $5,000 presumably if you're really disciplined about it, and do that every year. And then you start to build a portfolio and experience, and then it's a lot easier to A, fundraise, but also B, if you wanted to, get a job at a VC firm that's already established because you have a track record. So I think that's kind of the path. But just in general, actually, all of you are young, and you know, maybe you don't have a full-time job right now, but as you kind of think about graduation down the road and getting a job, I would definitely encourage you to think about, if this is interesting, maybe start angel investing with really small checks alongside friends or whatever, just to get experience, if that is something you want to do in the long term.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Kind of on the same like topic of, as that, like I definitely noticed on the website that like the angel kind of investor squad is composed of like over 30% female. And I was wondering, like, has the investment direction of Hustle Fund changed as a result of greater diversity, or like how has it kind of like impacted that in general?
Yeah, no, actually, I think so. We have many different programs going on, and actually, special thanks to Melanie, who's really spearheaded Angel Squad. So, Angel Squad is our community of angel investors, kind of like what I'm describing here, where people can invest for as low as $1,000 in a given deal, and they're investing alongside Hustle Fund. So, essentially, I wouldn't say that we get it 100% right, but it is fairly vetted deal flow. We are investing, let's put it that way. So we have our skin in the game, and so people can invest alongside at our terms. And so we are trying to sort of train the next generation of angel investors. And as a result, some of those first people have actually gone off and now, spun off either funds or, pools of money that they're investing in more startups. So we're actually through that angel community now deploying a lot more. With the same ethos as Hustle Fund, but sometimes at the later stages, I would say. Hustle Fund itself has maintained the same ethos and strategy, which is small check, work with the companies, large check, still very diverse in our investments in all senses of the word for the first check. And then actually proportionally, at least from race and gender perspective, like our follow-on rate is fairly similar. So I would say that not a whole lot has changed on the fund side. I mean, as far as the GPs go, 2 out of the 3 of the general partners are women. So, and I think as Maria mentioned, sometimes you gravitate towards ideas that you can resonate with from your own life's experiences. So I think that, that inevitably, if I'm going to be honest, like has probably led to more female founders just because we have invested in a lot of women's health things and stuff like that as well.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Justin. I have a quick question on a more meta scale. I'd love to ask, how would you characterize your own leadership style? And how has that uniquely contributed to the success that you've experienced in your career? And then if I could add another part onto that, what do you think your teammates contribute to complement those strengths that you think that you kind of possess?
Yeah, good question. So in my startup, actually, I started that with my best friend from high school. And in many ways, we were complementary in skill set. I think, I did a lot of the sales. I was more extroverted. She was definitely more introverted, but I think a much better problem solver than I. So she led all the technical things of our business. And that's kind of more or less how we divide and conquered. But I think beyond that, we were not always aligned on other things like what we wanted out of the business and things like that. And I think that fit is really important. And having those conversations is really important. I think I just was naive and didn't really know how to look for a co-founder or how to think about a co-founder when we started the journey. But sort of second time around in starting Hustle Fund, I knew what I was looking for in my co-founders who became Eric and Xian, which is like, we share the same mission and values for Hustle Fund, and that kind of also leads to our offerings. Eric and Xian are both really kind people. It's actually not to say that my other friends are not kind, but like that is a big part, like outwardly kind, I think is an important value for us and what we project also to founders. And then I think, I think in terms of complementary skills, I was looking for, like, if I was going to be honest with myself, even though I'm a bit more on the extroverted side, like Eric and Xian are really good at fundraising, really good with people and have really strong EQ. I'm probably the weakest link in that. And for fundraising and for running a fund, that's extra important. So I was looking for that. I think as far as leadership skills goes, like I was honestly a horrible manager at my startup Launchbit. Like I had no idea what I was doing. I had never led any people before. And I think that's just a process that every startup founder or every new manager in general goes through. But I think this time around, just like knowing myself, I've done things to kind of, counter my areas of weakness. For example, I'm very bad at hiring, like I cannot tell, and it's actually pretty akin to our investment model. I cannot tell who is good or bad from an interview. Like, how can you tell by talking to this person? And so actually almost everybody at Hustle Fund whom we brought in, we've generally worked with them lightly in some consulting or contracting or intern capacity before making an offer to make sure that it's a good fit. And that's worked out really well. I think the other thing that I'm really bad at is giving people direction. I don't think I'm a very hands-on manager. And so almost everybody, at least that I've hired, but in general for the whole Hustle Fund team, people are very entrepreneurial. I think if you're not entrepreneurial, you won't succeed at Hustle Fund just because there's just so much chaos. And Melanie maybe can attest to that. Like, you have to kind of be able to run with something, otherwise, because there's not going to be anyone there to kind of tell you what to do. And so I think we have had a couple of people who were not entrepreneurial, and that didn't turn out to be a good fit. And that is probably my fault as a poor manager. But, you know, these are the things you learn over the years about yourself.
Awesome. We have time for one last question. If anyone has a question, feel free to jump in. If not, I have one and I would love to ask it. Awesome. Yeah. So my question to you would just be like, I was wondering if you ever pursued, or your team ever pursued, an investment with a founder who you personally didn't feel like had that like hustle element, but it ended up surprising you in the long run. And if so, did that experience ever teach you about like maybe some internal biases you might have, and like, were you able to fix them?
Oh yeah. That's the other thing. I think that happens a lot, maybe not necessarily along the axis of hustle, but other things. And I can't even think of a concrete example, but I'm surprised all the time. Like, companies that you think are not going to do well, they go and do super well. Actually, to this point about hustle specifically, one of our portfolio founders, you know, when I met him, and actually, so let me take a step back. When we write our first check, it's a champion model. So any of us on the team can write that check. We do not all have to agree on it. But if we're going to do a follow-on check, we do all have to agree on it. So anyway, this founder, Eric, found this founder, invested in him. I had met this guy, and I don't know, he just seemed a little out of it all the time. Like, he just didn't seem there. I wouldn't say he didn't seem, he wasn't quite on drugs, but he just was not there. And I was wondering, like, how is this business going to go anywhere? You know, fast forward a couple of years ago, he is just killing it. And certainly there's some luck, like whether you actually have a problem that you're solving that's real, but you know, to his credit, he went and he did it. And I think that people surprise me all the time in this business. And that's why we have the model that we do, because it's just so hard to assess, like, based on talking to people, whether they're any good and whether their ideas are any good. And in this case, we did end up, you know, following on, but I wouldn't have made that first bet, like, in meeting him.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we also want to be respectful of your time. So I think we're going to end the session right here. But Elizabeth, is there anything else you'd like to share with the rest of ACES Breakthrough? We thank you so much for coming to speak to us.
No, thank you for having me.
Awesome.
All right.
Cool. Thank you all so much.
Have a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you.
And thank you all for coming. Wait. Oh, okay. Never mind. For attendance, but we'll just go off the screenshots.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. We'll send
Thank
it in the
you.
Slack. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
I don't. I just want to chat.